It was the send click heard around her world, a single, irreversible tap that delivered her most private, desperate thoughts not to her best friend's inbox, but to the CEO of the entire company. 1 minute, she was a clumsy intern. The next, her brutally honest diary, with an entire entry about him, was sitting in the most powerful inbox in the building. Her name was Maya, 22 years old and 4 weeks into her internship at the monolithic tech giant Orograph. The diary was her secret anchor in a sea of corporate anxiety, a document filled with unvarnished truths about her imposter syndrome, her financial struggles, and one painfully earnest entry detailing her quiet fascination with the company's elusive, brilliant founder, Elliot Thorne. Now, with one catastrophic misclick, her entire private world was broadcasting on the main screen of the one man who held her future in his hands. The question wasn't just if she'd be fired, but what happens when the most powerful person in the room reads your most vulnerable truth and sees himself reflected in it. To understand the sheer scale of her mistake, you have to understand the world Maya had just breached. Orograph wasn't just a company, it was a $200 billion empire built on data, and Elliot Thorne was its famously reclusive architect, a man who at 38 had revolutionized predictive analytics, a genius who gave fewer than 5 interviews a year and was rumored to read every line of code that shipped. His inbox was a fortress, managed by 3 executive assistants. An intern's weekly report wasn't just low priority, it was invisible. Unless, of course, that report was actually a 1.2 megabyte file titled Private Journal Do Not Open, docx. Maya had gotten the internship through a fiercely competitive diversity pipeline program, one of only 12 selected from over 4,000 applicants. She was brilliant in her own right, a first-generation college graduate who had taught herself to code at 14 on a library computer. But at Orograph, she felt like a fraud in a sea of Ivy League pedigrees. The diary was her lifeline, started on her first day. In it, she documented the quiet humiliations, the project lead who consistently mispronounced her name, the senior engineer who explained her own code back to her, the soul-crushing cost of a salad in the campus cafeteria that made her skip lunch to afford her bus pass. She wrote about her mother's pride and the crushing weight of needing this job to work. And then, on day 16, she wrote about him. The entry was dated 3 weeks before the fateful email. She stayed late to finish a data pull, and the floor was empty, a silent cathedral of glass and steel. From her cubicle in the intern pod, she saw the light under his office door, 3 floors up in the executive area. At 11 p.m., Elliot Thorne emerged, not in the crisp suits from the company keynotes, but in rumpled jeans and a faded band t-shirt, carrying a battered laptop case. He stood at the railing, looking down at the empty bullpen, a hand running through his hair in a gesture of such unguarded exhaustion it felt like seeing a ghost. She wrote, "He looks like the loneliest person in this entire building. He built this kingdom, but who does he talk to at 11 p.m.? I think genius might just be another word for a very heavy burden." She didn't call it a crush. She called it a profound, aching recognition. The mistake itself was a perfect storm of sleep deprivation and corporate pressure. It was a Thursday, the deadline for her first major project evaluation. She'd been up for 36 hours straight, fueled by vending machine coffee and anxiety. The report was finished, a solid 15 pages on user engagement metrics. The diary file was open on her desktop because she just vented about her fear of presenting 2 nearly identical icons, a blurry, trembling double-click. The to field auto-populated with ethorn@orograph.com, an address she'd only ever seen on the global all-staff email blasts. The subject line, Weekly Intern Report, Patel Maya. She hit send. The whoosh sound was the same as always. The world did not end, not yet. For 47 seconds, there was only the mild buzz of relief. Then the cold wash of realization began at the base of her skull, moving down her spine like ice water. She'd attached the wrong file. Her eyes darted to the sent folder. She clicked. The preview pane showed the first lines of her journal. October 12th. I dreamed of fire again, the kind that cleanses. Today, Mark from product talked over me 4 times. I counted. My voice feels so small here. A sound escaped her, a choked gasp. She fumbled for the recall function. The system spun, then delivered a cheerful, devastating notification. Message could not be recalled. It has already been read. The timestamp on the read receipt was 1 minute and 12 seconds after sending. Elliot Thorne, the man who barely glanced at reports from his VPs, had opened an email from an intern at 11:46 p.m. within 2 minutes of it arriving. Why? That was the first terrifying question. The second was what he found inside. Beyond the vulnerabilities and the struggle, the entry about him was on page 4. It was raw, unfiltered, and it did not describe a corporate titan. It described a tired man at a railing. It described a burden. It saw him. And in the hyper-calibrated, risk-averse world of corporate power, being seen, truly seen by a subordinate, is the ultimate breach of protocol. Panic is a poor strategist. Maya's first instinct was to run. She shut down her computer, grabbed her bag, and fled the building, her heart hammering against her ribs. On the subway, she played out the scenarios. He would report her to HR for inappropriate communication. He would forward the diary to her direct supervisor with a terse note about professionalism. The internship would be terminated by morning. Her career over before it began. She spent the night staring at her ceiling, every notification on her phone a potential death knell. But the morning came, and her employee badge still scanned her into the building. The world had not exploded. It was quiet, a terrifying, anticipatory quiet. By 10 a.m., there was still no summons. The normal rhythms of the office continued around her. She presented her actual report to her team lead, her voice a shaky monotone, waiting for the axe to fall. It didn't. The silence from the 40th floor was absolute. This, she decided, was a form of torture. The not knowing, the waiting for a consequence that felt as inevitable as gravity. She began to wonder if he'd just deleted it. Maybe he got 100 incoherent emails a day. Maybe her private despair was just noise. She was clinging to that fragile hope at 4 p.m., sorting through a stack of user feedback tickets when a new email notification appeared in the corner of her screen. The sender address was not a generic HR alias. It was E. Thorne. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained just one sentence. No greeting, no signature, just 10 words that stopped her breath and made the floor beneath her feel unstable. The sentence read, "Your observation about the weight of the building was correct." That was it, 10 words that acknowledged the breach, confirmed he'd read the intimate entry and offered, what? Not an apology demand, not a termination notice, a validation. It was the most disorienting possible response. For 3 hours, Maya did nothing, paralyzed by the ambiguity. Was it a trap, a prelude to a lawsuit? At 7 p.m., as the office emptied again, a second email arrived. This one had a subject line, meeting. The body contained a calendar invite for 9 a.m. the next morning in conference room 4001, not his private office. A small, glass-walled room on the executive floor. The invite listed only 2 attendees, Elliot Thorne and Maya Patel. No HR, no supervisor. Night was another sleepless vortex. She rehearsed apologies, defenses, pleas. She considered not showing up, resigning by email. But the part of her that had written that diary, the part that saw the tired man at the railing, whispered that running would be the wrong answer. At 8:50 the next morning, she stood outside the conference room, her professional blouse sticking to her back. He was already there, seated at the head of the table, staring at a tablet. He was in a suit today, the armor fully on. He didn't look up as she entered. "Close the door," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth she sometimes heard in his all-hands recordings. She sat, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The silence stretched. He finally looked up, his gaze assessing, unreadable. "The journal," he began. It was a severe breach of data security and professional protocol. Her heart sank into her stomach. This was it, the axe. But then he continued. "It was also the most honest assessment of this company's culture I have read in 5 years." He pushed the tablet across the table. On it was her diary entry displayed. He had highlighted passages, not the one about him. Others. The line about the senior engineer explaining her code back to her was highlighted in yellow. A note in the margin read, "Pattern, HR case 4421. Another passage, where she described the soul-crushing cost of a salad, was highlighted. His note, "Cafeteria subsidy analysis overdue." He had read it not as a voyeur, but as a diagnostician. Her private pain had been converted into a series of operational failures. "You documented a hostile work environment, financial pressure on low-tier employees, and innovation stagnation in the data visualization team," he said, matter-of-factly. "In a 15-page document you meant for no one else to see." He leaned back. "Why did you write it?" The question threw her. To stay sane, she managed, her voice thin. A sanity log, he repeated, turning the phrase over, and the entry dated October 18th, the one about the burden. He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked out the window at the city. What was the source of that observation? This was the dangerous part, the personal part. You looked isolated, she said, choosing her words with extreme care. The architecture of this place, it puts you at the top, but it also puts you alone. I wrote that genius seems heavy because no one asks the person carrying it if they need help. Another long silence. He turned back from the window. Your project report was adequate. Your journal is exceptional, not the prose, the pattern recognition. You have a lens this place has lost. He stood up abruptly. You will continue your internship. You will submit your weekly reports, and you will every Friday send me a new entry, not a diary, a dispatch. What you see, what you feel is broken, what no one is saying in meetings. He walked to the door, then paused. This is not an endorsement. This is an experiment. One word of this to anyone, and the experiment ends. Understood. She could only nod. He left. She sat in the silent, glass room, the world having turned upside down twice in 48 hours. The fear of being fired had been replaced by a more terrifying prospect, being seen and then being used. The following weeks were a surreal double life. By day, she was intern Maya, fetching coffee and running data queries. By Friday evening, she became a secret correspondent to the king. Her first dispatch was a shaky, overly formal analysis of communication breakdowns in her project team. He sent back 3 questions. Why did this happen? Who benefits from the silence? What is the cost? He was teaching her to dig. Her second dispatch was angrier, sharper. It was about the invisible labor of the interns, the unpaid overtime that was just passion. His reply was a single line: quantify it, hours, dollar value of labor, impact on project timelines. He was turning her venting into a business case. It was exhilarating and horrifying. She was gathering evidence against her own colleagues, her own company, and sending it up the chain to the one man who could act on it. And he did. Small things at first. A sudden audit of intern workloads. A revision to the cafeteria pricing structure. A mandate that all technical explanations be documented, stopping the mansplaining loop she described. People in her orbit started grumbling about new policies from the top. No one looked at the quiet intern in the corner. The turning point, the major pivot, came in her 4th dispatch. Frustrated with a glitchy internal data tool everyone hated but no one fixed, she'd written a passionate, sarcastic paragraph about it. On a whim, she'd sketched a rough idea for a fix in the margin of her notebook, a simple overlay that would streamline the process. She included a photo of the sketch in her email, calling it a pipe dream. His response was not an email. It was a calendar invite for a Sunday morning. Location, the R&D lab on the 9th floor. When she arrived, the lab was empty except for him and 2 senior engineers she recognized from company keynote speeches. They looked baffled. On a large screen was her notebook sketch, cleaned up and digitized. Explain the user pain point to them, Elliot said to her, no greeting. Walk them through your solution. For an hour she stood in her weekend jeans, explaining her pipe dream to 2 of the most respected engineers in the building. They asked hard technical questions. She answered, her voice gaining strength. One of the engineers, a woman named Lynn, finally nodded. It's elegant, simple. We over-engineered the original. We could prototype this in 2 weeks. Elliot looked at Maya. You'll work with Lynn's team, 10 hours a week, compensated as project overtime. This stays within this room. It wasn't a request. The internship had just become something else entirely. She was now a secret product consultant, and her cover was fetching coffee. But secrets in a glass building are fragile. The first crack appeared through Mark, the product lead from her diary. He noticed she was spending odd hours in the R&D lab. He made a joke about interns schmoozing with upstairs. It was light, but his eyes were suspicious. The second crack was her own growing confidence. In a regular team meeting, she contradicted him on a data point, citing a flaw she'd discovered during her secret project work. The room went quiet. She'd broken protocol. After the meeting, he cornered her by the printers. You've got quite the sudden elevation, Patel, getting special tutoring from someone. His tone was all friendly venom. Just trying to learn, she mumbled. He smirked. Right. Well, learning is one thing. Bypassing the chain of command is another. People notice. The warning was clear. The walls were closing in. She considered telling Elliot, but a new fear had taken root. What if he protected the company over her? What if this experiment ended the moment it became inconvenient? She was living in a paradox. The more valuable her secret work became, the more danger she was in from the very structure she was helping to diagnose. The bridge to disaster came in the form of an all-hands meeting. Elliot was announcing a new transparency initiative, born, though no one knew it, from the pages of her dispatches. He spoke about flattening communication, valuing unseen labor, empowering junior voices. Maya sat in the back, a strange pride and terror mingling in her chest. After the speech, as the crowd milled, she saw Mark approach Elliot, laughing, clapping him on the shoulder. They spoke briefly. Then Mark turned and his eyes scanned the crowd, landing directly on her. He didn't smile. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't congratulations, it was a target acquisition. That afternoon, her work laptop, which she'd never left unattended, required a password reset. It said it was a routine security patch. But when she logged back in, her browser history had been cleared. All her saved passwords were gone. And a single, unfamiliar bookmark was now in her toolbar, a link to the company's HR portal, specifically the page titled Reporting Conflicts of Interest and Inappropriate Supervisor Relationships. Bookmark was a warning shot, and Maya understood the language of corporate warfare. She didn't touch it, she didn't delete it. She left it there, a silent testament to the fact that someone was watching. Her immediate instinct was to run to Elliot to report the breach. But the old fear resurfaced. What if his protection was conditional? What if the moment this experiment became a liability, he would cut her loose to save his transparency initiative? She decided on a different tactic. She would become invisible. She stopped her Friday dispatches without explanation. She withdrew from the R&D lab, telling Lynn she was too overwhelmed with her core internship work. She reverted to the silent, compliant intern. She was trying to de-escalate, to make the threat she posed disappear. It didn't work. Mark's suspicion had crystallized into a campaign. A week after the bookmark appeared, Maya was called into a meeting with her direct supervisor and a blandly smiling woman from HR. The pretext was a routine mid-internship review. The questions were not routine. They asked about her exceptional access to senior engineers. They asked if she felt any undue pressure from any senior staff member. They asked with feigned casualness if she had ever communicated with C-suite executives outside of established channels. Maya, her heart a drum in her chest, stuck to a script of wide-eyed ignorance. She was just eager to learn. She was grateful for any mentorship. She had never emailed the CEO. That last one was a lie, and the HR woman's smile didn't reach her eyes as she wrote something down. The meeting was a declaration of war. They were building a case. The narrative, Maya realized with chilling clarity, was being shaped. The ambitious, troubled intern who developed an inappropriate fixation on the company's founder, perhaps even manipulating a chance email to gain unfair advantage. It was a story that would protect the company, neutralize Elliot's reforms, and destroy her. She had to tell him. She waited until late that night and sent a single-line email to his private address. "The experiment is compromising the experiment." He replied in under a minute, "My car, south loading dock, now." The black town car idled in the dim, concrete bowels of the building. She slipped inside. Elliot was in the back seat, illuminated by the glow of his phone. He looked tired the way she'd first seen him. "Tell me everything," he said without preamble. She did. The bookmark, the meeting, the pointed questions. The fear that Mark was constructing a narrative that would reframe her dispatches as manipulation and his attention as misconduct. Elliot listened, his expression granite. When she finished, he was silent for a full minute, staring out at the concrete wall. "They're not just after you," he said finally, his voice low. "They're using you to get to me. The old guard on the board, the ones who think my touchy-feely reforms are weakening the company." Mark reports to Derek Vance, the head of product, who sits on the board. This is a proxy fight. The personal crisis was now a corporate coup. Maya was a pawn on a much larger board. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We accelerate," he said, turning to her. His eyes were alive with a cold, strategic fire. "They want a scandal. We'll give them a revolution. Your project with Lynn, the tool overlay. We're moving the prototype launch up next week, and you're presenting it." Maya's blood ran cold. "I can't. They'll say you gave me the project because of the diary. They'll say it's favoritism." They'll say that anyway, he countered. The only way out is through. We prove your value is real, tangible, and profitable. We make you too visible to disappear quietly. But, he added, holding up a hand, you need to be bulletproof. From this moment on, every interaction we have is documented and copied to my chief counsel. We meet only with Lynn present. Your project work is logged in the official system. We play it so by the book it's boring. It was a daring, dangerous plan. It meant stepping directly into the line of fire. For the next 7 days, Maya lived in a state of controlled panic. She worked 18-hour days, perfecting the prototype with Lynn. Every line of code was peer-reviewed. Every decision was documented. Elliot was true to his word. Their communication was reduced to brief, CC'd emails about project milestones. The pressure was immense, but it was clean pressure. She was building something. She was fighting back. Day of the prototype presentation arrived. It was scheduled as a low-level product demo for a handful of mid-level managers. But when Maya walked into the conference room, her stomach dropped. The room was packed. Derek Vance, the board member, sat in the center, arms crossed. Mark sat beside him, a notepad open. Several other senior directors she recognized from company photos were there. And in the back, leaning against the wall, was Elliot, his face unreadable. This was no longer a demo. It was a trial. For 20 minutes, Maya presented. She walked through the user pain point, the elegant simplicity of her solution, the projected efficiency gains. She was nervous, but her voice grew steadier as she spoke about the work, about the problem she had genuinely solved. When she finished, there was a smattering of polite applause. Then Derek Vance leaned forward. A very impressive piece of work for an intern, he said, his tone smooth. Tell me, how did you come to be assigned to a project of this scope? It's quite unusual. Here it was, the trap. Maya took a breath, following the script she and Elliot had rehearsed. I identified the inefficiency during my assigned work on the data visualization team. I proposed a preliminary sketch to engineer Lynn during a mentorship meeting, which she approved for further exploration under standard intern innovation protocols. It was corporate speak, but it was clean. Mark spoke next, and the resources allocated, the R&D lab access, that's quite a leap for a preliminary sketch. He was trying to imply special treatment. All intern projects with potential high impact are granted lab access per Section 4 of the Internship Handbook, Maya replied, her voice level. She had memorized the handbook. The project was logged and approved through the standard channel by Supervisor Kim. She clicked to a screen showing the project ticket with all the proper approvals. It was all there, a perfect paper trail. The room was quiet. They had nothing. Derek Vance looked at Elliot. You must be very proud of your mentorship program. Elliot didn't move from the wall. I'm proud when good ideas win, regardless of where they come from, he said, his voice carrying easily. The data shows this tool will save 200 engineering hours a month. That's the only metric that matters. It was a victory, a narrow, hard-fought victory. As the room emptied, Maya felt a wave of dizzying relief. She had faced them down and won. Elliot caught her eye and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was over. But it was. The wait it gets worse moment came 3 days later, not from within Orograph, but from the outside. A popular tech gossip blog, Silicon Circuit, published a story. The headline was incendiary: Orograph CEO and the Intern, a diary of power, privacy, and passion. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation. It detailed the accidental email of a deeply personal diary, the secret project fast-tracked for the intern, the unusual access to the CEO. It quoted anonymous company sources describing a special relationship that had caused tension among senior staff. It did not outright accuse, but it painted a picture of blurred lines, favoritism, and a potentially exploitative dynamic. Someone had leaked, not just the fact of the email, but the content of the diary. Mark, or someone in his circle, had gotten access. The story went viral in minutes. The carefully constructed paper trail, the official protocols, they were meaningless against the court of public opinion. The narrative was too salacious, too perfect. The powerful, lonely genius and the vulnerable, brilliant young woman. Orograph stock dipped 2% in after-hours trading. The board called an emergency meeting. Maya's phone blew up with messages from friends, from worried family, from reporters. She turned it off and sat in the dark of her tiny apartment, the walls closing in. This was the scandal they'd feared, but now it was global and it had a life of its own. At 2 a.m., there was a firm knock on her door. She opened it to find Elliot, flanked by a severe-looking woman he introduced as Grace Cho, the head of corporate communications. He looked more than tired, he looked ravaged. "We have 3 hours before the markets open on the East Coast," Grace stated, marching into the apartment. "We need to get ahead of this. We need a statement from both of you." "A statement saying what?" Maya asked, her voice hollow. "The truth," Elliot said, his gaze locked on her, "but not the truth they're telling, our truth." Grace laid out the strategy. They would acknowledge the email error. They would acknowledge the subsequent project, but frame it as a merit-based discovery of talent. They would categorically deny any personal relationship. It was the safe play, the corporate play. It would protect the company, and by extension, Elliot. But as Maya listened, she felt a slow, burning anger rise. It would also frame her diary, her private fears and struggles, as an unfortunate mistake, a piece of evidence in a case she never agreed to be part of. It would reduce her brilliant work to a footnote in a scandal. "No," Maya said, the word cutting through Grace's precise planning. Both of them stared at her. "What do you mean, no?" Grace asked, her tone icy. "I mean that plan turns my life, my work, into a PR problem to be managed. It asks me to apologize for seeing something true and writing it down." She turned to Elliot. "You asked me for dispatches, for the unvarnished truth. That blog post out there is the varnished, twisted, sensational version. If we fight it with more careful varnish, we lose. We confirm their narrative that this is all about secrets and shame." Elliot studied her, a new intensity in his eyes. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we give them the real story," Maya said, the idea forming as she spoke, terrifying and clear. "Not the scandal, the system, the pressure that makes an intern work until she collapses and then vilifies her when she succeeds. The culture that isolates its leader so completely that a single moment of human recognition becomes a conspiracy. We don't deny the diary, we explain it, we don't hide the project. We celebrate it as what happens when you actually listen to the people in the trenches." She took a deep breath. "And I'll do it. I'll go on the record. I'll tell it all." Grace looked horrified. "That is a catastrophic legal and PR risk. You cannot control that narrative once it's out." But Elliot was no longer looking at Grace. He was looking at Maya with the same focus he'd given her prototype demo, as if seeing the core of a brilliant, dangerous algorithm. "It's the only move they won't expect," he said, almost to himself. Then he nodded, a decision made. "We do it. But together, not as CEO and intern, as two people who broke a broken system and have the data to prove it." It was the moment the hidden, secret experiment went public. It was the moment they stopped being pieces on the board and became the players who would flip the table over. The corporate coup was about to meet a very public, very messy revolution. The press conference was held not in a corporate boardroom, but in the company's own open-plan atrium at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Elliot's idea. "If we're going to be transparent, we do it in the light where everyone can see," he'd said. The room was packed with journalists, camera crews, and lining the upper balconies, hundreds of Orograph employees who'd been told it was an all-hands address. The air crackled with anticipation. This was not a standard corporate apology. Elliot and Maya walked to the simple podium together. He was in a dark suit, no tie. She was in the same modest blouse and cardigan from her internship photo, a deliberate choice. They stood side by side. Elliot spoke first, his voice amplified and calm. He did not begin with a denial. He began with an admission. "1 month ago, I received an email from intern Maya Patel. It contained a personal document she never intended to send. I opened it, I read it. That was a violation of her privacy, and I apologize for that." The room erupted in murmurs. He had just admitted fault. Grace Cho, watching from the side, closed her eyes. He continued, "In that document, I did not find gossip or scandal. I found a detailed, unflinching audit of my company's culture. I found evidence of burnout, of inequity, of brilliant minds being stifled by hierarchy and fear. I also found a single paragraph about myself, written by someone who saw not a CEO, but a person carrying a weight. That paragraph was not a profession of feelings, it was a diagnosis." He then did the unthinkable. He gestured to the screen behind them. "With Maya's permission, I am going to show you that paragraph now." The text appeared on the giant screen, the same words Maya had written in the dead of night. "He looks like the loneliest person in this entire building. I think genius might just be another word for a very heavy burden. A hush fell over the atrium. You could hear a pen drop. He had weaponized vulnerability, turning the most intimate part of the leak into the central thesis of their defense. This was the catalyst, Elliot said, for a series of conversations. Not about romance, but about reform. Maya became an unofficial consultant, a canary in the coal mine of this company. The project she developed, which some have tried to frame as a favor, was a direct solution to a problem she identified and solved. The proof is in the code, and in the 200 engineering hours it saves every month. This isn't a story about a personal relationship. It is a case study in what happens when leadership actually listens to the most junior person in the room. Then it was Maya's turn. She stepped to the microphone, her hands steady. She spoke not as a victim, but as a witness. She talked about the pressure, the invisible labor, the fear of speaking up. She talked about the moment she realized her private pain had been turned into a blueprint for change. I didn't want to be a whistleblower, she said, her voice clear. I wanted to be a good intern. But sometimes the system is so broken that the only way to be good is to break the rules quietly and then have the courage to explain why you did it when the lights come on. She didn't attack Mark or Derek by name. She didn't have to. She described the patterns, the suspicious questions, the implied threats, the bookmark left on her computer. The crowd understood. The questions from the press were fierce. Was this a cover for a relationship? Elliot stated, unequivocally, that they had never had a personal meeting outside of work contexts and that all interactions were documented and involved other employees. He invited an independent audit of their communications. A reporter asked Maya if she felt exploited. She paused, then said, I felt seen. And in a corporate world that often treats employees like data points, that is a revolutionary and terrifying thing. The question isn't whether he used my perspective. He did. The question is whether he used it to make the company better for people like me. The new cafeteria subsidies, the intern workload audit, the project I built, I believe the answer is yes. Effect was seismic. The stock, which had dipped, began to recover within the hour as analysts praised the bold, transparent strategy. Inside the company, the reaction was divided but potent. A flood of internal messages poured into the all-staff channel, many from junior employees sharing their own Maya moments. The silent majority found its voice. Derek, Vance, and Mark were placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation into conduct unbecoming and potential harassment. The board, recognizing the tide of public and internal opinion, swiftly announced its full support for Elliot's transparency initiatives. In the weeks that followed, the scandal transformed into a legend. Maya's internship was not terminated, it was completed with distinction. She was offered a full-time position as an associate product strategist, a role created specifically to channel her unique lens into the company's processes. She negotiated for a formal bottom-up feedback program, giving every intern and junior employee a direct, protected channel to suggest reforms. She took the job. Elliot, for his part, did not return to his isolated 11th-hour existence. He became a more visible, approachable leader, holding regular open-floor sessions. The burden he carried didn't disappear, but it was no longer his alone. The company culture began a tangible, measurable shift. And what of the two of them? This is where the story holds its final, surprising detail. They did not embark on a secret romance. The power differential, the scars of the public ordeal, the ethical lines, they were all too stark. But they built something else, a profound, lasting partnership based on mutual respect and a shared battle. They became the most formidable duo in the industry, a team that spoke in shorthand and trusted each other implicitly. Years later, when Elliot was asked in an interview about his greatest innovation at Orograph, he didn't mention a product. He said, creating a structure where a 22-year-old intern could send me her private diary, and I could read it not as a crisis, but as a blueprint. That's the system that will outlast me. As for Maya, the diary itself, the physical notebook had a final chapter. On her last day as an intern, she found a small, wrapped package on her desk. Inside was a simple, elegant frame, and within that frame, under glass, was not a photograph or a certificate. It was a single printed page. On the left side, in her own handwriting, was the scanned paragraph about the lonely man at the railing. On the right side, in Elliot's precise script, was a response written on the day of the press conference. The burden is lighter when someone helps you carry it. Thank you for seeing me and for letting me see. It was a private artifact of a very public earthquake, a testament to the fact that the most catastrophic mistakes can sometimes build the most honest bridges. Maya Patel walked out of Orograph that day not as a cautionary tale, but as an architect. She had taken a send, click herd around her world and turned it into a new foundation. The clumsy intern was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a system designed to make you small is to tell the truth so loudly that they have no choice but to rebuild the system around it. So what remains after the headlines fade and the stock price stabilizes? It's not the scandal. Scandals are momentary fires, bright and consuming, but they leave only ash. What endures is the crack they reveal in the foundation. Maya's story is a blueprint for a different kind of workplace, one where a moment of profound human error doesn't have to end in destruction, but can become an unexpected catalyst for honesty. We live in a world of perfectly curated personas, of professional filters and calculated responses. We are taught to hide our uncertainty, to mask our exhaustion, to treat vulnerability as a liability. But what Maya and Elliot discovered, in the most chaotic way possible, is that the raw, unedited truth holds a power that polished perfection never can. It connects. It clarifies. It cuts through the noise of corporate speak and lands, clean and direct, on the other side of the screen. This is more than a story about an email. It's about the courage to be seen before you feel ready, and the greater courage required to truly see someone else, especially when they hold less power than you do. It asks a question that lingers long after the final frame. In your own life, in your work, what transformative truth are you keeping locked in a private document because you can't imagine the person in charge being brave enough to receive it? Perhaps it's an idea you've been afraid to voice, a frustration you think you must swallow, a quiet observation about a burden someone else is carrying alone. Maya's journey teaches us that the systems we inhabit are not fixed. They are built and maintained by people. And sometimes all it takes to change them is one person, with trembling hands, who hits the wrong button for the right reason, and another person, on the receiving end, who chooses to read not with judgment, but with curiosity. Thank you so much for watching. This story was crafted with care, and we hope it resonated with you. If you've ever had a Maya moment, a time when a mistake or a moment of vulnerability led to something unexpected, we would be honored to hear about it in the comments below. Share your story. And if you know someone navigating the complexities of a new job or feeling small in a big system, pass this along to them. It might be the reminder they need. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our growing community of storytellers. We have so many more narratives to explore together. Until next time, remember, the most powerful send button you possess is your own voice. Use it wisely, use it boldly. We'll see you in the next